Susan Enguidanos, and I'm an associate professor in the Leonard David School of Gerontology. So, and today I'm going to talk about Advance Directives, healthcare proxies, and POLST forms. So I'm not sure how many of these things you already know about, but I'm going to give a brief overview, and then I'm going to talk specifically about how COVID-19 is impacting some of these things. In fact, I have to say I spoke to 2 reporters today about this exact same issue. So it's coinciding with a lot of things. This is a big issue right now in the media. A lot of people are very, very concerned about the care they're going to receive and what to do if they're sick. So I think I've spoken the last couple of weeks. I've spoken to about, I don't know, 8 or 9 reporters about this. And hopefully we'll see a big uptake in the use of them. So some of this might be a little elementary for some of you, but I thought it would be a good place to start to make sure we're all understanding what I'm talking about. So what is an advance directive? It's basically a written statement of your wishes and preferences and choices regarding the type of care you would like to receive should you become ill and unable to speak for yourself. It's also something, it's a really powerful tool to help you kind of think through the things that you would want and also to communicate with other people. So advanced directives are seen as a piece of a bigger puzzle. It's one piece of advanced care planning. So hopefully it's accompanied by conversations either with your provider, your primary care physician, and your family, your healthcare proxy, whoever you choose to be your representative. So it's not really intended to be a standalone piece. So why do you need an advance directive? Well, my bias is that we all need advance directives, regardless of our demographics. It's a way of letting people know the type of situations that we would like to live under, what kind of conditions we'd live under, what type of interventions we would want. Should we become seriously ill? Should we have very, very serious events, such as become brain damaged or become completely unresponsive in any way. So one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that this is something that is only used if you can't express your decisions. So there's kind of like a misconception among some populations that if you do this, have this document, it means that whoever is indicated as your healthcare proxy can pretty much speak for you. And that's not the situation. The case is that it's only used if you can't speak for yourself. And one of the things we all need to keep in mind, and we see in the media almost every day, these stories, right? We're seeing these stories about really young people that are getting COVID and that terrible things are happening to, and that they're dying, and that have been on ventilators for weeks on end, and that they're getting their amputations, that their heart is failing. So it's good to keep in mind that this isn't necessarily something that should be age related, especially in COVID-19. And I think one of the most important parts that we should consider is that we don't want anyone to ever have to guess what we want. That I think for family members, that's the largest form of burden is that if you're guessing and you don't know for sure the type of interventions or care that your family member would want, and maybe something doesn't go well, or maybe they're on a ventilator and you feel that they're suffering, if you don't know for sure that what type of care they prefer, that could be very, very burdensome and something that you carry with you for a long time. So again, they're only used if you become seriously ill or injured, you're unable to speak for yourself, and they generally include 2 parts. One, it would be the living will, and that contains the choices that you would make in terms of what type of aggressive treatments you would want. And the other is the medical power of attorney, or the healthcare power of attorney, or the healthcare proxy. There's a lot of different names for this person. And this is the person that you would designate to make decisions for you should you not be able to do so. So again, the living will is the choices that, and your preferences around end-of-life healthcare interventions and decisions. And again, it's really that tool to help you think through some of these things and communicate with your family members. In terms of a medical power of attorney, And this is really a legal form that is designate the person that would speak to you only if you're unable to speak for you, if you're only unable to make your own medical decisions. And again, there's a lot of different terms that are used. One of the things that you want to consider when you're selecting this individual is that it may not necessarily be the person in your family that you're closest to. It may not be your spouse. It may not be a parent or a son or a daughter. It needs to be somebody that you feel has the strength to implement whatever type of care interventions that you prefer. I always, my poor husband, luckily he's not around, he can't hear me, but I use this story with my husband that he had when I first met him. He had a rabbit, and he took this rabbit in because the rabbit wasn't able to walk anymore. And so I was feeling very sad because I knew I was going to see him and he was going to have to put this rabbit down. Well, he showed up at my house with the rabbit, and he let that rabbit drag its feet around. I mean, it was very horrifying to me, but for another month before he was able to put the rabbit down. Not that I'm equating my end of life to be like the rabbit, but for me and my personal choice, I know would be a really hard thing for him. And so when I did my advance directives, I have a team. And so it's my daughters along with him so that they can help him and take off some of that burden, because I know that would be hard for him. So this is, I think, one of the most important aspects of the advance directive is really thinking through and thinking who has the ability to implement the type of care that you want or don't want and can support that. Some of the advantages of advance directives is, these are really directives that reflect your values, the decisions, the type of treatments that you want. You can change your document at any time. You don't have to stick with it. So if you're younger and healthier, you're most likely going to have more aggressive care than if you have multiple chronic conditions that, things are becoming difficult for you, or you're on what we technically call the slippery slope, where you have multiple chronic conditions, you're losing some functioning. So then at that point, you may change your advance directives and you may want different types of care. You do not have to have an attorney, but for some states, you may have to have them notarized. In California, we're very lucky, we're not one of those states. You can complete your advance directive and have it witnessed, and that's all you need. And the documents, again, they reflect your wishes. They should be shared and discussed with your healthcare proxy. They should be shared with your primary care physician. If you're hopefully you have, or in a medical group, or your physician has an electronic medical record that they can be scanned into, so that if you're admitted to a hospital, they would be able to access your directives. A lot of people will place their advance directives in a very prominent spot in their house or a sign. I am, as you may have heard that Jeanette say, I am right now in Florida because my father-in-law is in the hospital. And on his refrigerator, there's 2 notes that say advance directives in the freezer. So he wants to make sure that if there's a hurricane or any type of fire, those advance directives are protected. So, and we also have copies as well. So some of the disadvantages around advance directive are they may not be available when a crisis happens, when you need them. They may not be readily available in a chart if there's not electronic medical record or haven't been scanned inside of one. Again, in some states, they require notarization, which could be difficult for a number of reasons, especially when we're in quarantine. So a lot of people are really reluctant to have interactions with other people right now. And in terms of living wills, we can't always anticipate every type of scenario. So there could be issues. You can't cover everything in your advance directives. They're really general. And I'm going to circle back around this when I talk about COVID-19. And they also may be overridden by a physician. So if somebody is in an emergency, in fact, there was this great story on NPR one morning was told by emergency room physician that he had this patient come in who was in cardiac arrest, and they did CPR and they worked on her and they brought her back. And just then the daughter comes running in with the advance directives and said, take her off the ventilator. She does not want to be, she does not want CPR. She does not want to be on a ventilator. So those situations, it's a little bit different when somebody's already been ventilated and now you're taking them something away rather than not doing it in the first place. So that's something that it's really important to have that advocate around, that healthcare proxy who's going to speak with you, because sometimes you have these situations where they have to be very aggressive. And so the advance directive doesn't necessarily translate into a medical order. So for example, if you went into cardiac arrest in your home and you have do not resuscitate order. So you don't want to have CPR, and the paramedics show up and your healthcare proxy is like, oh, we shouldn't have called, but here's their advance directive. It doesn't matter. They have to start CPR. That is the law. They can't stop and read a form and then say, I wonder if we should do this or not. It doesn't work like that. So that's one of the disadvantages. So generally, the decisions that are included in advance directives include life-sustaining treatment, so artificial nutrition and hydration, tube feeding, CPR, do not resuscitate orders, ventilators, whether or not somebody wants to be on a ventilator. And that it covers just a kind of sketchy overview in certain conditions. There's probably hundreds of different types of advance directive forms. There's the one that I think that was shared with you, but there's so many different versions and a lot of them have more details. Some of the older ones have very few details. So there's just a choice, yes or no. Sometimes advance directives will say, if the physician determined you to be brain dead, what type of care would you like? So there's very, very specific scenarios, but again, it doesn't cover everything. So one of the things that I want to emphasize today is about the discussions before the crisis. Because when we look at COVID-19, somebody gets COVID, they usually don't know until they get sick. And then right then it goes really fast, right? It's almost too late at that point, because the time from when they first become symptomatic, according to a lot of the studies that are coming out, the time between when they get symptomatic and need aggressive care is a matter of days. So there's not a lot of time to have these conversations. And once somebody becomes very sick, it's going to be really, really difficult to have these conversations. So having them before we're in crisis allows somebody to really think through the type of care they want and to make have honest discussions and to really reflect and plan. And it's an opportunity to really think about yourself and the type, what's valuable to you, what's meaningful to you, what's important in your life, and how do you honor your own values in your advance directive. And I personally feel, having had to make healthcare decisions on behalf of my father where I did not know what kind of care he wanted, I personally feel that it's the best gift that you can give anybody. I mean, here I am in this field and I wasn't able to get my father to do this. So it was really, really difficult for me. I mean, he would just shut me down. So I think maybe I was too close, not sure why, but having those discussions, I think is really important. And my father-in-law, I have to say, my father-in-law and I have had this discussion probably 20 times. And, he's, every time I see him, he's like, okay, here's an updated will. Here's my updated advance directive. And I'm not sure what thing is new, but they all look about the same. I'm very clear about what he wants.
We do have a question.
Yes.
From the chat. How is the legal status of advance directives? Do we need to notarize advance directives? And how does the legal status of advance directives come from?
So the legally, they're not legal medical orders. Okay, so they are a legal document in that it is recognized as who is your healthcare proxy. But in terms of your wishes, that is only relevant to your healthcare proxy. So there's no legal binding. There's no binding agreement or understanding that that person or a physician has to follow your orders. So again, it goes back to the importance of picking that proxy. So that is the one aspect of them that is legally binding in who your proxy is. Going back to the notarization issue, in California, I don't know if we have people out of California right now, but in California, you do not have to notarize them. You do have to have them witnessed by, and I believe on the form, most of the forms, it's by the people that are not your healthcare proxy. So you have them witnessed by other people. So there have been a lot of studies. I can cite even more studies, or just a few studies that have shown that there's a really strong association between improved quality of care, including greater and longer enrollment in hospice and fewer hospital deaths, which is associated with quality of care for patients who have had an advance directive. And then also there's a couple of studies that have found that patients with advance directives are more likely to receive the care that they want. So we would call this care coordination with their preferences. So, and this is really the number one outcome that we're looking for, right? Because we want, regardless of the type of care, whether it's aggressive care, whether it's CPR, whether it's just comfort care, we want to make sure that people get the care that they want and their wishes are respected. So this is some work that we did, just looking at trends and advanced directives. We actually have one more wave that we're working on right now to add to this. With a lot of these large data sets, there's a lag in data, so it takes you a while to get the more updated. But what we're finding, and this is a study, this is from the Health and Retirement Survey, and it's a nationally representative survey of older adults. And what we're finding around older adults is that advanced directives are around half the older adult population. And then when we look at trends by age group, you can see that our oldest old are more likely to have advanced directives. So it's about 60% of them as compared to 50% of the middle older old group, and about 40% of the 50 to 74 age group. So as people get older, they're more likely to have an advanced directive. Here we looked at timing. So we wanted to see when people made advance directives before death. So 0 is death on the left-hand side, and we have months to death are on the bottom of the bottom axis here. So you can see that we have a lot of people that are making advance directives really close to end of life. So if we look more at this data in a different way, you can see that we have in the last months before life, before end of life, we have a big spike in the portion of people that are developing advanced directives. And I think one of the things that was most interesting about this is we had a hypothesis that people who were developing advanced directives right at the end of life would be more likely to want comfort care, palliative care, non-aggressive care. But we actually saw that, I don't have that slide here. We actually saw that in the months before, the 3 months before death, that there was a uptick in the portion of people that were selecting aggressive care. So we have a hypothesis about this, and that's that these individuals are making decisions in the moment. So we call them in the moment. So in the moment of crisis, the individuals are making these healthcare decisions about what kind of care they want when they're in an emergency room and they can't breathe. So it's really hard to have make rational decisions when you're short of breath and you can't breathe, or when your loved one is having a crisis or and in the hospital. So this is not, we really consider this not to be the optimal time to have these advanced care conversations and decisions, because what you decide in a moment of crisis isn't necessarily representative of what your loved one wants, or even for yourself. So either way, whether it's more aggressive care or less aggressive care, but what was I going to say? I'll circle back to it. So when we look at COVID-19 and the dying process, again, I was talked about the rapid progression. So symptoms quickly escalate, and many frail and vulnerable people require hospitalization. So once somebody's in the hospital, we're also seeing things are going really quickly, right? So they're only the sickest are being hospitalized. So the sickest of the sick. And again, we're seeing these decisions made in the moment. There's an increased risk of being placed on a ventilator. And then once that happens, you're not able to have these conversations and make decisions. You're ventilated. So now you need that proxy. So if you don't already have that proxy, you're suddenly going to have a family member in that situation where they're going to have to figure out what you need, and they may not be able to be there with you when they're making that choice and decision. So this is a big problem in our healthcare system right now, is that individuals aren't able to be with their family members in the hospital. I mean, we're really grateful with my father-in-law. So good timing that I can use him as my object lesson. He'd appreciate that. He likes when I talk about him in class. But we could use him as an object lesson, and we are able to go and visit him. He's not on a COVID floor. It's there, obviously very, very secure, and you have to be super careful, but we're able to visit him. But nobody that is in a COVID room or suspected of COVID is allowed visitors. And so again, this changes really the landscape of what we would expect when we lose a loved one, or when a loved one is sick, because now we're not able to be with them. We're not able to discuss things with them. They're no longer able to discuss things, because when people are placed on a ventilator, they're oftentimes sedated, because your urge is to rip that thing out of your mouth, right? So you're completely sedated, so that you don't fight it and use whatever strength you have fighting the ventilator. So no decision making at this point. And for individuals that, with my father-in-law, again, one of the most important things that he's emphasized over and over and over again is that he does not want to die in the hospital. That's very, very important to him. And so we had this COVID conversation a couple of days ago, and because I was telling him, I was like, "Oh, Russ and I, that's my husband, have been talking about, this is what I told him. This is what I would do, or what I would want and not want if I had COVID. He knows, that there's no way I'm going to want ECMO, and there's no way I'm going to do this and this. And so we had this. It just brought up this conversation. We ended up having a very natural conversation. And he said, if I had COVID right now, even though he's in the hospital right now, he said the first thing he'd want to do is if he was able, is to go home and die at home, because he would not want to die in the hospital. But having that real quick progression really precludes having those conversations and the ability to make that choice. So I pulled some things from the media, because this issue of dying alone has been in the media a lot. I don't know if any of you have seen it. So this comes from Daniela Lamas from the LA Times. It was published in the LA Times. And she said, I paused outside my patient's room and watched her for a moment. She lay on the bed, tethered to a ventilator by the tracheostomy tube in her neck. Her husband sat in a small plastic chair beside her with his hand on her leg, smiling at some silly sitcom playing on the TV. I hesitated a beat, and then I entered. I had to tell him there was no way to soften the blow. The hospital is changing its rules, I said. No more visitors. When you leave today, you need to say goodbye. So, I think that's a very poignant quote, because I guess in a sense, that was a lucky one, because he was able to say goodbye. But a lot of the families, when they take him to the hospital, they're not thinking about not seeing them again when they leave them. And so we're trying, when we look at this about the impact of dying alone on a family, you know, it's very, very traumatic. I mean, this is something that's very unknown to us. We do have research that shows that family members who have their loved ones die in the hospital have greater rates of depression and complicated grief as compared to people whose family members die at home. I'm sorry. So we know that this isn't a good outcome because not only are they dying in the hospital, but they're dying alone. So they're unable to provide support for their dying loved one. They're unable to say goodbye, unable to provide their loved one with what we would call a good death, or what an individual would think is a good death. I don't think any of us, I mean, because raise your hand if you don't agree, but I don't think any of us think dying on a ventilator is a good death. And I know that many people, I mean, we know the vast majority of older adults prefer to die at home, and it's well over 70% in the US. Well, that's not everybody. It's a lot of people that prefer to die at home. So we know that people don't really prefer or want. They will say, what would you want to do? And if you only had so many days to live, what would you want? Nobody would say, I want to be on a ventilator in the hospital. And they're oftentimes unable to support their family member in having this death of their choice because it's so sudden. So it really precludes being able to be thoughtful about this, particularly for higher risk populations. And I do want to point out, I guess it's because it's my field, I'm extremely biased, but I have no chronic conditions. I mean, I take vitamin D and that's it. And I don't even do a good job at that. But I still felt that this was a really, really important conversation for my husband and I to have, just because who knows, you know, it's just, in a sense, I feel that it's almost Russian roulette. And so we're also seeing a terrible toll on our healthcare providers. And I'm sure you've read about some of these stories in the newspaper there was a physician who committed suicide, and they really felt that it was the impact of watching these patients die alone. So this is, again, this is Daniela Lamas, and she said, I wanted to be the doctor who is always willing to spend a few extra minutes despite being stressed or rushed. But that is not the kind of doctor I've been for the past few weeks, because I don't want to spend a moment longer in a COVID-19 patient's room than I have to. Even with a mask firmly in place, even with a gown and eye protection, I do not want to share the same air. So I do what I need to do, and then I leave. I don't take the time to reassure, to explain, surely not to hold a hand. Truth is, I'm scared. So one of the things that we're going to need to figure out, and this is some of the work that's being funded, or some of the COVID-19 related work that's being funded by the government, includes investigating the impact of COVID-19 on our healthcare providers and our first line workers. Because if we have a huge healthcare workforce with post-traumatic stress disorder, you know, what's that going to look like, and where are they going to be, and are they going to be able to care for a second wave of COVID, which is highly anticipated? I'm just like the good news person, right? I guess I'm used to that role. One of my students reviewed my course review, said, I really liked the instructor, I like this course, but I wish it wasn't so depressing. So it's hard to talk about end of life without it being a little bit depressing. So this is a column by our own Sunita Puri, who's a palliative care physician at Keck. And I think this might have been in the New York Times. I'm sorry, I don't have the reference. But her column was called It's Time to Talk About Death. The corona pandemic highlights how much we need to have conversations about end-of-life care. Joseph, a man in his 70s, has been on a ventilator for 2 weeks. His heart, lungs, and kidneys are failing. Though I know these facts about his physiology, I will never see him up close. I can only glance at him through clear glass doors, the ventilator and dialysis machine obscuring his face. The coronavirus has limited the number of physicians who can enter his room. I cannot sit with Joseph's wife and children and ask what sort of medical care he would want. I cannot read their body language, lean in towards them, or offer a tissue as they cry. Now, because of the coronavirus, most hospitals don't allow families to visit. So clearly, I think all of this really illustrates how COVID-19 has changed the way people die. They're alone. There's a lot of isolation. We have people dying on ventilators. I really emphasize the suddenness. I mean, this is quick and evolving. I mean, right now we're all here, we're all healthy, and then once somebody gets COVID, it spirals out of control very quickly, particularly for people with multiple chronic conditions. So, it's not planned and we're completely unprepared. I mean, we still don't really understand the virus. It seems like every day I can't keep up with the changes and the new stories that are coming out about the symptoms, or the populations that are being impacted. So we're losing some of our traditional end of life rituals, and these rituals are what we really hold on to and value or respect our loved ones. We have these rituals as a way of honoring and respecting our loved ones, being with them, making sure people don't die alone, making sure that they have the care that they want, and even funerals. I mean, this is something that we can't do right now. We can't go to have funerals for our loved ones. We can't have virtual funerals maybe, but that's about it. It's been really difficult on all ends in terms of our culture and our rituals and all the things that we do to demonstrate the importance of this individual and to gather and gain that support from the community. So having that community embrace and really support the people who've lost loved ones. So one of the instruments or tools that has been used or is being discussed as a tool to be used clinically is some of the research studies that are coming out about survival data. So if people can make informed decisions because they can look at some of this data regarding age groups and what happens and the likelihood of survival in different conditions. They can look at their own values and think about what type of care they would want. These are some of the tools that came out from Ariadne Lab, and basically how to have these conversations with COVID-19 positive older adults. So, let's plan. We have to plan for the worst. And I really think that we need to extend this beyond our COVID positive older adults. I think this needs to be something we all have to talk about now. And these extraordinary circumstances, we have to plan for the worst. So if the worst happened, what kind of care would you want? Who would you want to help you make decisions? It's really important right now that we have these conversations and talk about what kind of care you would want if you became sicker. And these are some of the key COVID-related questions. And I want to point out some of them are different and because of COVID. And it really, and some of them are traditional questions we've used for a long time. So what would be most important to you, or what is most important to you? If you became sick, what would be your number one value? And generally, it's being free from pain. I mean, that's what the research shows, that people prefer, to be comfortable, free from pain. But asking people what's important to them, what are they most worried about? So is their number one concern dying alone? Is it being a burden to others? Is it having pain? And, what kind of things are helping them through difficult times? So this really helps understand their values and things that are important to them. And asking specifically around, and these are things that we wouldn't traditionally ask in a non-COVID world, or our pre-COVID world, because we'll probably never go back in terms of some of these questions. If you became very sick with COVID, would you prefer to stay where you live or to go to the hospital? So this is a really important question because, as I stated earlier, when somebody gets to the hospital, they're generally not going to have that opportunity to die at home. So for somebody who's already very frail, or maybe somebody who's already in palliative care or hospice care, going to the hospital is probably not going to impact the outcome, other than the fact that they would die in the hospital rather at home. So if they chose to go to the hospital, would they want to receive intensive care in the hospital? Would they want to be in the ICU? And again, these are new questions. These are new things that we wouldn't generally ask of people. We don't generally have these conversations. It's usually, do you want to be resuscitated? Do you want to be on a ventilator? But now we're asking more specific questions because these are the things that we're seeing the most with COVID. So we have some logistical challenges with COVID. With the Advance Directive witnesses, just having somebody witness it, some of the things that have been recommended is if you have the ability to scan it and send it to your family members so that they know, they're aware, send it to your primary, oh my gosh, they're so popular. Send it to the primary care. If you don't have a scanner, then you can download a scan app on your phone, which I have on my phone. It's a little app called Genius Scan, and then you just take a picture and it looks like a scanned document. It's fantastic, but there's a lot of different apps out there, and then you can just email it. Worst comes to worst, you can just take a photo of it and send it to people. For people without a smartphone or don't have that ability or technology, you're gonna have to go the old-fashioned route and maybe just fill out 2 of them. Print out 2 if you don't have a way of scanning or copying. Print out 2, do 2 exacts, send 1 to your family member, talk to them on the phone. Let them know where if you haven't sent that to them, let them know where it's at. Make sure that your doctor has a copy of this. If you can't, again, mail. If you can't send, if you can't copy, you can make multiple. What else do you have to do right now? You can make multiple advance directives that say the exact same thing.
We did have a question which you just partially answered, which is, should I send a copy to my doctor? And the other question was, should I send it to the nearby hospital?
So you could contact the hospital and see if they have a mechanism for scanning it into their electronic medical record. That would be an option, because if there was an emergency, you would be most likely taken to that hospital, right? The other thing is, you can ask your physician if he shares that electronic medical record with that local hospital. So if they're in an accountable care organization and they already have a relationship, then when he scans it in, it may enter into access for a very wide system. There are some companies now that are starting up that are doing some management of electronic advance directives electronically, so that they're kind of the warehouse for them. But again, they're not widely used yet in California, so I don't necessarily think that's a way to go right now. So this is my attempt at humor, my death humor. So while we all wish that, that we wouldn't have to have this encounter with death, unfortunately, we're all going to end up at that same place. So I'm just going to spend a few minutes. I want to make sure we have time for questions. So I'm just going to talk very quickly about POLST forms, which is a physician order for life-sustaining treatment. And these are very different from advance directives because these are actually medical orders. So they are a legal document. They're a medical order when they are signed by the physician and the patient, or the patient's surrogate if the patient is unable to speak for themselves. It's written on it's a one-page form. It's written on a very bright pink cardstock piece of paper, and it's usually at the bedside of the patient and follows them everywhere they go. And you notice I said bedside. It's because these forms are for patients who have very advanced illness. They're for patients on hospice, the patients that are in nursing homes, that are in residential nursing homes, that have multiple chronic conditions, that are very ill. So they're developed specifically for that population. So I just want to make sure we have time. So comparing advanced directive and POLST, again, advanced directive is for every adult. POLST is only for those with serious illness. Advance Directive requires decisions about a lot of future treatments, whereas a POLST is just options. Do you want to be resuscitated? Yes or no? That's it. No scenarios, no conditions. It's just, do you want this or not? Do you want to be on a ventilator? Yes or no? Do you want feeding tube? Yes or no? So you can't designate any specific scenarios. Advance Directive is a clear statement of preferences, and POLST is very clearly just checking boxes. Advance Directive isn't always with the patient because, you know, can you imagine if we carried them around for years and years and years before we needed them? It's just, they wouldn't even be legible by then. Whereas the POLST stays with the patient because the patient's not really going many places because they're pretty sick. Advance Directive requires interpretation because you have to figure out how to apply those preferences to different scenarios, where the POLST is an actionable medical order. So now you have somebody who's very sick in your house, maybe they're on hospice, and they're let's say they're actively dying, and the caregiver panics and calls 911. EMT comes in, they see that bright pink paper, they look at the checkbox, oh, do not resuscitate, and they do nothing, because that is a physician order that is a legal order saying that they cannot resuscitate that patient. So, so these are the choices. So again, there's a surrogate on there, CPR, full or limited treatment, nutrition. So it pretty much takes into account some of the limitations with advanced directives, but again, it's only for a very small portion of the population. So physicians have to comply with the POLST, whereas they don't necessarily with the advanced directive. Once that's signed by the patient, regardless of what the healthcare proxy wants in those situations, it has to be followed because it is a legal order. And this is research just showing the effectiveness, that it has been very, very effective. Generally, most of the research comes out of Oregon and is used with nursing home patients. This is what it looks like, except it's not pink. It's supposed to be pink, and these are some of the treatment orders. So again, it's one sheet of paper, super easy, but it's not something that any of us would probably want to have. Some caveats with COVID-19 is for people who already have a POLST. So if you have a family member who's in a nursing facility who has a POLST, you may want to look at that again in light of COVID-19, because we're talking about patients that are much higher risk. So maybe you would want different choices. So the beauty of advanced directives and POLST is that you can make a new one and pretty much override the previous one with that date. So during COVID-19, you may want to revisit some of those choices and make a change, and you don't have to have it notarized. You just need the physician's signature and either the proxy or the patient if they're cognitively able to do that. So you're able to get around some of these barriers that we see with advanced directives. And then once we have a vaccine, you can go in and change that POLST again. So for advanced directives, I think that I strongly feel that we should all, if we already have one, we should all be handwriting COVID specific. If I have COVID-19, this is what I would want. And if it's full code, that's great, whatever it is, but be very, very specific about it. And that you can leave that indefinitely. So that will never change, but you can have really, because we know what COVID-19 looks like. So we can have very specific things that we would want under that condition that may not relate at all to the rest of your advanced directive. Just because COVID is so, I'd say so unpredictable. So I just want to make sure we left enough time for questions. Hopefully that something there made sense. Sorry about the phone ringing.
This is really helpful, Susan. It's a hard topic, and I have to commend Katie. Katie Beck has been trying to get this for staff assembly and workshops through the Emeriti Center for years. And COVID is really an important, I mean, that's really making us all think more about it. I don't know if you want to continue to share your screen or open it up so that you can see everybody. We've asked, is there a way to post this, or what kind of information can we have available? We're still, and Courtney, our student here, raise your hand. She and I are working on updating the website. So if you go to the front page of our website, we will slightly change it, because the very first thing you see is Susan's photo and this event that's taking place. But there's a whole page, and there's an advance directive that you can type in and save it. There is the 5 wishes that maybe Susan can explain what that is. It's similar. We have our My Confidential Documents link that's on our website, so that you can put all your passwords and all this information in one place for yourself and save it. I don't know if you want to make a comment on that, Susan, and what we will have available, maybe your slides that we can post there.
Yeah, I'm happy to share my slides with you, and people can download them from your website. That's not a problem.
That would be great.
And you have all the links, and I think I sent you a COVID specific document, discussion document from Ariadne Labs.
Mm-hmm. That's posted already.
Yeah. Okay, great.
I have a question. Is there a form, if somebody is moved to hospice and there are very specific things that they would like in hospice, but maybe they're not in the hospital like a POLST form would do, is there a similar form for hospice if they're no longer in the hospital?
If they're in hospice, home hospice, which 90% of our hospice is in the home, then they can use the POLST form. The POLST form is 100% appropriate for that population.
What's the fastest way to get a hard copy of the pink form? Because you can't really print that out on your computer.
Yeah, only if you have the pink paper. Right? So I would get it from a healthcare provider. All your healthcare providers should have the POLST forms. If your family member is at a nursing home, the nursing home are required to have POLST forms. They are mandated by the state to have conversations around advanced care planning. And then all hospice agencies will have a POLST form as well. So if you have a loved one who is receiving hospice care, they will have a POLST form.
Any other questions?
I just want to say one thing. This is really exciting to see so many people. I did this talk to the Emeriti Center a number of years ago. I think probably 5 or 6 years ago, and there were maybe 5 people there. I think this really attests to the timeliness of advanced directives with COVID-19, and I think it's really exciting because we need to get the word out about advanced directives with or without COVID-19. Everybody should be able to have these conversations, and I think it gives us a really good opportunity to say, hey, I went to this webinar. I mean, that's a great way of bringing it up. I went to this webinar today, and they were talking about advanced directives and COVID, and we should talk about this too. Mm-hmm. And so then you kind of, it's an opportunity. So my students, I make my students in my class do advanced directives for themselves and their parents. And they always say, how do I have this conversation with my parents? And I say, you tell me you have a class assignment. If you don't do it, you're going to get an F. It's amazing how many parents are on board.
Yeah. So how can we get the word out? Just as I made a comment at the beginning of this, that USC News picked up that Trojan connections. And so then it got blasted, and then people started signing up, right? So how can we, you said you've had 9 interviews recently. Mm-hmm. How can we get the word out for, even if it's just for our USC employees and our retirees?
I mean, it may be something we can work with human resources with, just say, given what's going on, we should all have these conversations. Here are some links to some forms, and, or maybe put it in Workday. Is that the HR? We have HR there. I'm so bad with these things. Mm-hmm. But I think that this is something that we really have a responsibility to share with all of our employees. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's obviously we should all have this anyway, but it's particularly timely right now.
So if you would if you would send us a quote, I love that we all have the responsibility to share. I mean, this is a very important resource. And then Katie is on the executive board of the staff assembly. We could engage also the academic senate, and I believe Connie Roque is on the call right now. So the academic senate, the staff assembly, I represent the retirees. We also have the alumni association. So that's a whole nother group. Jerry Walker represents the Retired Faculty Association, which is also part of our retiree population. We've got SRA, Staff Retirement Association members that are part of this population. I really think that this is such a valuable resource. So the two things, if I may ask of our speaker and our head honcho here, is just some kind of a quote that we could put forward. And then also, if you wouldn't mind using your expertise to take a look at the website that Courtney and I are working on to make sure that it has the proper wording to describe what's there already.
Sure.
And if we can tweak it and make it a little more official and better, then I can send that link to HR. I can send it to Diane Schrader, who's part of the Employee Gateway. And then we could get this out to staff assembly and the academic senate. And so then there's no excuse once we've done our due diligence of making sure that these resources are available.
Right. And I think a lot of people, I mean, I don't know, I know a lot of my colleagues and friends are doing virtual happy hours. I would say, here's a great topic at one of those virtual happy hours, saying, hey, let's talk about this. And it's, or virtual family meetings. One of my close friends, it's like clockwork, every Sunday evening they have a virtual family get together, and that's a great opportunity to bring it up. Just say, I've been seeing this, I saw this lecture, I've been seeing it in the media, or I heard this situation. It's so much easier to bring this up when you're using somebody else or something you read in the paper or see on the news as the example. And it's not that I'm talking to you about this because I think you're old and going to die. And that's what people think, that when they bring it up, that their older family members are thinking, oh, this is what they're thinking because I'm old and I'm going to die. And that's why they're saying this. But I always bring it up when I want to talk to somebody else about it. I always bring it up about me personally. And then naturally people start sharing.
Yes. And we have this from Leslie Porter. Jeanette, could you send us an email with all the appropriate links and explanation that we could forward to friends and family? So yes, we are creating, Courtney and I are creating a website that has all of these resources on it. And we will also include the PowerPoint presentation that's available. And with your permission, we can also edit and post the actual video presentation, so it's online and people can click on it and watch it.
We have another question, Jerry Walker.
Jeanette, do you happen to have the standard Advance Directive forms that could be linked on your website or distributed as an email link?
Well, what's on there right now, there are two documents that are already there. One is the free document that is a PDF that you can type into and print it out yourself. It's from Cedars-Sinai. It's a really beautifully done. It's not from USC. If I had a USC one, I'd post that one there. And the Emeriti Center just paid for 200 copies of 5 Wishes, which is similar.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, this
Is
one
that
is
what you have?
from the California Medical Association,
Oh, okay.
Advanced Care Directive.
Mhm.
So I'm
I
not,
I generally use the 5 wishes. Not. I'll just explain a little bit about why. I think the one that from Cedars is really nice too. The 5 wishes is has a lot of detail, and you don't have to. There's a lot of common things that people like that are already listed, and you cross off the ones you don't want. So I think it gives you a little bit more detail than some of the other forms, but largely because it's recognized among most states. I think it's about 45 states recognize the 5 wish forms. So that's, that's another thing, that makes things difficult, is that if you have something from California, it may only be recognized in California. So the Cedars form may only be approved in California. I don't know this for sure. So if you are planning on moving, or if you go somewhere, your state may not recognize that form, which is just a pain in the butt. So that's why I tend to use 5 wishes, because my students are from all over the U.S. And because we have blended classrooms, online and in class, so it's the form that's most applicable. So just another thing that will give you a headache with this.
so I do have a question about the comment. So since the Emeriti Center's budget's very limited right now, I went ahead and bought 200. So the first 200 people that click on it can have it for free, but it is not, you can't type in it. You're going to have to print it out. You get one time to print it out per person, and then you have to hand fill it in yourself. And the reason for that is I didn't want to pay more money for the upgraded version, and plus $10 a month to keep it going. So it was a one-time purchase that the Emeriti Center purchased for the first 200 people. So that will be posted on our website. So first come, first serve.
This is the 5 wishes you're talking about?
The 5 wishes.
And so it's on there now?
It's on our website right now. And it's been posted there. And then there's also a link so that if you wanted to pay for your own, you could. But it does go there, but I would like Courtney to add the extra wording that the 5 wishes is recognized by 48 of the 50 states in the United States. And maybe a disclaimer for the Cedars-Sinai one, because we don't know.
And you might want to check with Cedar, because it may have been, they may have had it approved in more than one state, but it's just something to be aware of. It's nothing is ever that easy or consistent.
So we'll let Courtney do that. Courtney's got a lot on her shoulders right now. We also have Iman on the call, who's one of our students. So we've got 2 students with us today for our intergenerational communication. And next week, before I go on to what's happening next week, Susan, for the group, is there any other final comments that you would like to make?
Now, I would say, everybody has time right now. Well, I don't know. I don't have time, so maybe I shouldn't generalize that. But most of the people I know, because I'm writing COVID grants, so most of the people I know have a lot of time right now. And this is a great opportunity to do this. You can buy the 5 wishes. I think if you buy over, do you remember how many over a certain amount? They're $1 each. So you can give your family a gift of the 5 wishes and say, hey, we're all going to Zoom and we're going to do this together. And this will be a really fun thing that we're going to do. I'm so sorry about this.
I don't know, Susan. I don't think it's a really fun thing to do. We could make it fun if we have a lot of wine and ice cream or something.
I think I think the people I hang out with think this is the best thing ever. So.
Well, that's what we want. We want people to think that this is the best thing ever. It's actually something that you can do during the pandemic that is helpful to your family and friends, right? I mean, this is a hugely valuable tool. So we can't.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. My students, you know, of course I force them into doing this, but oftentimes I hear that this is some of the most meaningful things that they've ever done while at USC. And I've had students that contact me years later and say, you know, I did this with my dad, and he had a heart attack, and I knew exactly what to do, and I knew what he wanted. And so I think it really is a gift to for your family members, the fact that, you know, that they could be in that position of making those decisions, and they'll have that confidence that they're doing right by you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, I'll be quiet now.
I think it's wonderful, and I hope we can capture some of these little conversations, maybe to really promote this. I think that this is exciting, that maybe our students can get behind this and help us do this. And I know we've run out of time, but I wanted to remind you, Gerotech, which is a student group, will be presenting next week. And it looks like it's going to be really great. It's how to shop online and all the different apps that are available. And then the following couple of weeks, we've got ITS coming for their security team to help you stay very secure online. They're going to be doing a series of phishing and other kinds of things. Again, we're here for wellness and education to protect you, and we're tapping into our experts at USC to help you every Friday at 2 p.m. So again, thank you so much, Susan, for joining us. Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate you being here. Spread the word. We would like to have more than 43 next time.
That's a lot. That's great. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Susan.
Thanks, everyone. Take good care and be safe.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.